What's up, you guys? So this is the part 2 of our previous video regarding the stablecoin adoption and the Clarity Act. Now, unless you go through the bill step by step and go through the legislation, as I'm doing right here, it is almost impossible to look at the market and feel positive, because anybody can put a spin, especially crypto Twitter, which is highly dangerous. But we're going to look at this as pragmatic as we can, because ultimately, by going through the fine print, you start to realize where they're heading with this. And the dollar is the main thing here. The rise of stablecoins and implications for the treasury market. Now, if you look at the bonds market, you realize that the treasury bonds, of course, the US overall, the 10-year yield is going up. And this is one way right now, US is battling the rest of the world when it comes to the adoption of stablecoins. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, because there are projects related to stablecoins that will ultimately come and give us those juicy gains. However, we need to also understand why the US and the global market really is competing for this stablecoin regulation clarity, because there's also one hell of a competitive advantage, as the Europeans have shot themselves in the foot again. MiCA requires 60% of all reserves to be held in a TradFi traditional finance bank. This is why lots of big institutions right now are paying for articles concerning the stablecoin market and how the impact is going to be. And largely the spin is quite negative. But we know as crypto investors, it is almost certainly that a lot of the smaller projects ultimately may find, without retail, may find difficulty in finding a place in a new world that's competitive. Now, all of the RWA certified projects, you know, they will do very well. I do believe that the stable coins also regulate an additional, of course, as well as the consumer regulation. We are also thinking about or starting to plan for institutions printing stable coins and then coming into the casino. And that's one thing you cannot rule out at the moment. So there is that advantage. There is also this angle of the cross-border payments, focusing mainly on the drivers for stablecoin adoption. Now, if you think about how long it takes you to process a crypto transaction right now, it's fairly straightforward, right? Cross-border, frictionless, and the banks are ultimately going to take over this space, because ultimately the delay tactics, the expenses, especially in emerging markets. Can you imagine doing business in Africa? You've got 54 countries and you've got 54 different currencies. So this is, you know, arguably, if you take a longer term look at what this is all about, of course, we talked about the risks, and we will talk about more risks and what projects do benefit from this. But some of the largest treasury holders right now are basically the likes of Tether, the likes of USDC, and it's going to continue to grow that way. It's not something that we can fight. And as long as they have the ability to introduce fail-safe mechanisms, for example, if you look at CBDC, which is an area that we, of course, the legislation talks about and tackles, you can see many, many different amendments here for the Senate when it comes to the CBDC Anti-Surveillance Act, which is built in to try and ensure that this bill doesn't absolutely go to Big Brother and we get watched for our cryptocurrencies. But let's continue with this, because this is going to be very interesting. And again, I do believe certain cryptocurrencies benefit, especially when we talk about the hierarchy. Exactly what's been going on. That money has not been opened up to the markets, because there is another design through stablecoins in which they can earn yield. And these are one of the risks I saw with having the regulation that's coming. Now, of course, the first federal framework was back in July. That was the Genius Act. And of course, the second piece of legislation is the Clarity Act, passed through the House in July, waiting for the Senate. Now, this one's going to be the huge one for altcoins, because it creates the concept of a mature blockchain. You have to understand, there is a criteria. No single entity can control 20% of token supply, okay, or voting